You know, a dream is like a river, ever changing as it flows. And a dream is just a vessel that must follow where it goes. Trying to learn from what's behind and never knowing what's in store makes each day a constant battle just to stay between the shore. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Maxwell Ivy again for the first time in like forever. And this is the What's Your Excuse show where I'm hoping by the end of the hour you're going to be asking yourself if he can do it, if his guest can do it, then what is my excuse? You can find the show at theblindblogger.net. That's also where you can hire me to use my vast experience getting myself booked on podcasts and radio shows to get you more exposure and allow you the opportunity to share your story, reach bigger audiences, and build your brand or your business. So today I have my first guest in a long time. I'm really happy to finally be recording again and finally be sharing somebody and having them share their experiences and knowledge with you. And hopefully we'll all learn something today, including me. So I want to welcome Tammy Moses. She is a hoarding strategist. She has her parents both hoarded different things, but back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't call it hoarding yet. And she has gone from not really talking much about hoarding to talking about it all the time to now being an advocate for a couple of groups. Well, heck, I'm just going to let Tammy do it because I've already forgotten. I'm sorry, Tammy. Welcome to the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out to do this with me.
Thank you, Max. I really appreciate you having me. I'm happy to be here. And you really do, I think about what's my excuse when I see all the things that you do. And I'm like, I don't really have a good one. So
yeah, to think I fought that show name for over a month. My former co-host and great friend Frederick Bai, who got me started on doing my own show, he's like, it has to be no excuses or what's your excuse? I'm like, no, it doesn't. And we put it out to the internet and nobody had any better ideas. And they were all like, you're crazy if you don't go with that name. So it has stuck. And, a lot of people have asked me, like you said, if Max can do it, then what's my excuse? And there's some days I still have a little trouble accepting that mantle, but who am I to argue with all those loyal fans out there,
Right.
So, yeah. So why don't you tell people a little bit about your story as far as how you came into contact with hoarding in the first place and how it affected you and your family in the beginning before you decided to make this your mission.
All right. Well, the couple of groups that you mentioned they're actually my hashtags I have. They're AKOPTH, which is adult kids of parents that hoard. And the other is YLITH, youth living in the hoard. And those kind of came about over a period of time. When I was growing up, there was a lot of stuff. There was clutter. There was things, and you couldn't really navigate through the house well without knocking into a box or a bag or something. And, we didn't really have a name for it. It was just kind of embarrassing. It was just kind of like you might have people over, but at a certain point I got to the age where I realized other people didn't live quite like this. And I had a slumber party and one of my friend's moms came to pick her up and there was a stack of egg cartons by the door. And thankfully there were no eggs in them, but those cartons fell over. And I just remember thinking, I'll never have people over again. This is too embarrassing. I'd been to that friend's house and they certainly had no egg cartons stacked by their front door. So I was probably about 13 when I really made a decision. I'd already had an awareness that this wasn't, normal, but I kind of made a decision that I was going to stop having friends over. It was just too outside the norm. And the other aspect, and I realize in some of the other folks I've talked with, I never really addressed this, but I'm seeing it come up more and more, where my brother was in a wheelchair. And so that had a lot of different dynamics in our family as well. And by having a lot of stuff, that limited his ability also to navigate through the house. So there is a lot of emotional, relational components that now that I'm older and haven't lived there in years, that I can see now. And so I lived there through until my senior year of high school, and at which point I moved out. I had told myself if I ever got out, I would never go back. And so my senior year of high school, I went to live with I'll call her Mrs. M. She was kind of a grandma figure to me, but she had some health issues, and her family really wanted someone to live there with her, especially to be there at night. And so I did that for about 3 months as a senior in high school. And, when you're 18, you think you know everything, right? So
yeah.
That lasted about 3 months. And then I was like, this isn't going to work. I'm trying to be an adult here, but this is not working for me. And I was faced with the challenge of saying, I could go home, but I always told myself if I ever got out, I wouldn't go back. And so I ended up begging my actual grandma to let me live with her. And she just said no at first. She didn't want to make my dad mad. And I was like, well, I'm not going back there. So, if you say no, I'm going to start calling other relatives. And so I was like this blackmailing little kid, but I was like so determined that I wasn't going to go back to that, because I felt like I really needed to get away. And so I did live with my grandma. I enlisted in the Navy when I was still a senior in high school in the delayed entry program. And for me, that was a good choice, because I really wanted to get out of there and have a life where other people didn't know my history. And when I was thinking about your show this morning, I was like, well, some people really are freaked out when their kids decide to go in the military. And apparently my mother was, but I didn't learn that till a couple of years ago. But the great thing for me was I didn't have to reveal much if I didn't want to. And so for years, I never talked about hoarding or that impact or the shame or embarrassment. And I really thought I was the only one until about 5 years ago, when I started looking into a business and talking about some of the homelessness issues I had seen. And through a business mentor, I had a conversation around, well, housing, yeah, that's a big issue, but what else do you know? And so I started talking about hoarding, and I said, this is what I know. And they're like, there's like shows about that, right? I'm like, well, yeah, I know that, but I'm not going to talk about it. That was hard and shameful and whatever. And eventually it came about that it was like, no, that's exactly why you need to talk about it, because a lot of people have had these experiences and they're not willing to put themselves out there. And I was the same way. I wasn't going to talk about that. That was horrible and hard and all these things. But the truth is there's kids right now that were in that position. The position I was in, there's kids right now in that position. They're trying to get out of there. They don't know how to deal with the clutter. If they try to, they get yelled at. They get put down. There's kids that go to school and their clothes smell like the messy house. I mean, there's so many heartbreaking things to me that I know about that it's like, how can I be quiet about that? So thus now I have a big mouth about the aspect of the kids and the family members that are impacted by it. So anyway, that's kind of the not so short story of how it came about that I started to write and blog, and I've presented at Hoarding Awareness Conference a couple times. And I'm really looking to expand that reach, because when you look at like first responders, a lot of times firefighters are the ones that respond to a fire. And if they respond to a hoarded home, that's a whole different ballgame. If they can get in, sometimes they can't get out. And so there's just things like that where it's a far-reaching problem, and there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to handle it, but they don't really know what to do. So I'm trying to. Hoarding is dark and difficult and hard, but my goal is to be the light that is able to walk in there or is able to assist people with some better options to deal with it. So I'm not sure if you can hear me, Max.
Yes, I can hear you somehow. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. You told me not to open my mouth about the internet quality. So that's all on me, and hopefully people will muddle through with us. I don't know what it is with the internet this particular weekend, because we just recently updated our internet and things had been going very well for a while. So it probably is all my fault. So you presented at conferences on hoarding, and I wasn't aware that there was actual whole conferences around hoarding, but I guess that just shows how big the issue is and how little most of the world realizes that it's out there.
And the interesting thing is that I didn't know there was really anybody that had conferences either. And once I started to dig around a little bit, I discovered that there were places that had these, and it really didn't come about until I want to say it might have been sooner than that. But anyway, the diagnosis of hoarding syndrome was not in the diagnostic manual for mental health. It was more classified as a obsessive compulsive, which there are components of that within hoarding, but it isn't like someone needs like a complete orderly room, that type of thing. Hoarding is kind of the opposite of that in a lot of ways. So once that kind of became a diagnosis, that kind of opened the door to more conversations and conferences and things like that. There are also places that have hoarding task forces that are made up of different entities in the community, which could be mental health, it could be concerned citizens, other entities that are dealing with it, and a lot of cities and counties, real estate. There's a lot of places that actually do.
Because hoarding is actually, in some cases, when in the extreme cases, hoarding can actually be a health hazard and a danger to people who live nearby the hoarder. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, it is, and it's one of those things where a person who hoards will often say, "Well, I'm not hurting anyone," and that may be true. They may not be actually actively harming someone, but say you live in a place that has tons of stuff, and say you have expired food, and if you're not able to maintain your residence, there's access points for rodents to get in. And so now not only do you have rodents, but potentially your neighbors could be impacted by that. And so there are some health hazards that are inherent in some of those situations. However, not everyone is at. There's a difference between like hoarding and squalor, and then some people hoard cleanly and they don't have, old food and things like that. But other people hoard more food and old papers and wrapping and things that are more of an attractant for pests, basically.
And that
And
are also more of a source for fires should one get started.
right, fire hazards are huge. And if, like, say, for example, you can't access your plug-in, so you run extension cords through the piles and over things and run it out so you can run your computer or charge your phone or use a space heater, because sometimes you can't use the actual heat because it's all blocked. And
Yeah.
so those are all things that increase uh, the possibility of you having a fire, and that is life threatening for you. And say, for example, if you live in an apartment building or close quarters, the potential to impact nearby places is also really an issue. And
Yeah, I have a good friend who lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in a row house, and there's 3, 4 of these narrow houses right, literally within feet of each other. And if one of them, so the county requires that all the houses in the row are inspected every year to make sure that they've got their detectors and extinguishers, and that the light fixtures aren't damaged in some way, because they realize if something happened in one of those houses, most likely the rest of them are going to go too.
right, and that is a real concern when you are living in a situation like that. And I mean, there's the argument that, this is the US and we should have the right to live how we want in our space, so on and so forth. But if what you're doing is going to negatively impact others, there's like this fine line. And I'm in a couple of groups where we've been discussing this, and it's like, yes, we need the autonomy of the person, but at some point, their actions or lack of action can impact others. And I'm not minimizing the fact that there's often a mental health issue, sometimes depression, anxiety, even more severe types of mental health issues going on that are causing that trauma that are traumatic, and that's causing the hoarding behaviors. And so I'm not at all minimizing that there is this mental health component. In fact, you have to address it if you want to help people not recreate that hoarding situation. But there's still this public health aspect that I think that's why some people shy away from talking about it, because no one really wants to say, yeah, my mom's house is so bad it's impacting property values around them, even though
Yeah,
that's what's
yeah,
happening. So I think for me, a lot of
yeah,
it's been, once I say something, even if it's just a tidbit, people will tell me either their own experience growing up that way, their parent, a neighbor, a friend, aunt, Hazel down, there's just so many people that are impacted. And it's like this really quiet little epidemic that someone needs to shine a light on. And because for me, the stuff is the problem and part of the issue, but there's all those people in there. And when I see the houses that look, you can't always tell, but sometimes you can, where a house is like overflowing with things. And I just think about all the people in there that are suffering in some way, and I'm like, so what do we do about the people that need help, and the family members that are living there and they need help? How do we start mitigating it instead of letting it get to the point where it's a fire, where it burns down a row of houses? I've seen it, articles in New York where one apartment impacts like this, 36 units all the way around it.
yeah.
And so some of the bigger cities I see seem to have a better way of starting to address it. I live in a more rural area, and so there is a lot of people that have homes and are in rural settings where you can pack your house full and your barn and your shed. And when that's full, you just build
Yeah,
another one or you buy another one. And
yeah,
now you have a lot of
yeah,
crap, but
yeah,
now also whoever has to come in after you and clean up has got to deal with all that stuff. So there's just a lot of aspects to it that I think people don't necessarily recognize or realize. And a lot of people wouldn't have a reason to.
Yeah. Well, is it harder to work with somebody who's gotten to the point of squalor, or is it harder to work with somebody who has a large, clean collection who doesn't are either of them more likely to see themselves as a hoarder, or are both challenging in different ways?
I would say it's challenging in different ways. Part of it is attachment to the things, whether it's a food wrapper from a takeout place where you had a good meal with a friend, say that friend has passed away or moved away. And so there's this fear that if you get rid of that food wrapper, somehow you're losing the connection to that person, even though that food wrapper just represents a moment in time for you. That's why you don't want to get rid of it. Versus someone who maybe has, 5,000 pairs of shoes all tucked in boxes and they've never worn them. There's still this attachment to those items, which is why they aren't letting it go. And I mean, there are cases of people who will just buy and buy and buy things that they never use. And so it is a very clean, organized, collection, if you will, that overtakes their house or their space.
I was thinking about comic type collectors, people who collect merchandise. I was thinking about some of those people. Have you ever worked with one of those types of collectors or hoarders?
I have not worked with someone I have seen some of the people, like their entire house is like Coke. Everything is Coke bottles or Coke related merchandise, or trains, or could be books. Books are actually a big thing for some people. And if you march in there and say, we're going to get rid of your stuff, that's not going to go over well. But there is a difference between collecting, because a lot of times collectors are maintaining their items. They might have a zillion Matchbox cars, but they're all organized and categorized, and they're shined and pretty, and they want to kind of show off their collection, versus someone that hoards who would never let you in their house because they're too ashamed of their living situation. But the attachment is still the same, that I find, where there's a reason why you don't want to let some of these things go.
Okay, and so for you, it's all about finding out what the source of the attachment is, and then seeing if there's some way that you can have them remove the clutter without feeling the loss of the attachment.
Right, and not traumatizing them, because a lot of times the reason people hoard is because of traumatic events that have occurred in their life, and I see it as, it's like a protective measure where it's like a blanket almost, where this is how they're covering and dealing with their wounds. That could be primarily what I see is if a death or divorce, or sometimes loss of a pet, can really send someone into a spiral. Like maybe they weren't hoarding, but now they are, because this is their coping mechanism. And
I see. Kind of like those profiling shows where they talk about a trigger event that makes somebody go from somebody who was a little weird to somebody that starts chopping up body parts.
Yes, essentially, there's that trigger.
That was probably a bad example, but it was the one that came to my mind. And you've known me long enough to know that my mind sometimes works that way. So,
but it is kind of like, well, the straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where it does happen, and which is actually kind of a good point, because a lot of times nothing happens until there's an external pressure point, like a landlord sees the condition of a property, or a person goes to the hospital for some sort of medical procedure and then they can't come home because they can't navigate their house with the walker or the wheelchair or whatever device they need to get well again. And so sometimes nothing happens until something happens. And that can be the very frustrating part if you want to step in and try to help someone who basically says, I don't have a problem and I don't want you in my space. So there usually is some sort of a tipping point where something has to give. And for example, my parents lived in their hoarded space for many, many years. And my dad's health got to the point where he couldn't navigate through the space anymore on the paths that were there. And he ended up in the hospital and transferred to a nursing facility. And he spent 3 years in that nursing facility before he died because he couldn't go home. Not only the medical needs were high, but there was no space to be in the home. So it's like he couldn't go back, and he never could really understand why he couldn't go back. And it was sad, but it was also much healthier. I mean, honestly, who wants to be in a nursing facility? I'm just saying. And if you've never been to one, you may not know what I'm talking about, but if you have been, you know it's like there's a minimum requirement of living that happens, but it isn't like you're in your own living room or your own house. You know, it's just not that same environment.
No, I was going to ask you, or I had planned to ask you, if your parents were still hoarding, and or if they had changed or modified in some way. So I know now that your dad ended up having to leave and never return. Is your mom still living in the house?
So my mom lives on the property where the house is. However, she is living in basically a small camper, a travel trailer, because there was so much stuff in the house. But it took like a lot of discussion and talking with her about, okay, maybe you should try getting something else to live in since the house is so full. And the house has not had running water since forever. And so the idea was that she would move into her camper and be able to live in that a little better. And now essentially it's about as full as the house, you know. And partially it's because she's trying to pull things out of there that she wants to, important things to her, which I had encouraged her to do. But there's a difference.
You hoped it would be a small number of important things as opposed to lots of semi-important things.
And that's kind of how what happens is, for them, everything's important. And for someone else, you know, we might say, okay, I'm going to keep, 10 newspapers from whatever versus 1,000,
Yeah.
So there's like this not a recognition of it's basically being recreated just on a smaller scale. And so it's kind of frustrating because I can see what needs to happen, but I know what she won't allow it to happen, which is the case for a lot of people that have a parent or a loved one that is basically in complete denial about what the problem is.
Yeah. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking with Tammy Moses, and her website is homesareforliving.com, which I love that name. She is a strategist for people who hoard. She's also calls herself the Chief Encouragement Officer, which I really wish I could steal that, but it wouldn't fit me, but it's a great title to give yourself. So I enjoy that. I want to bring this back a little towards being in business or being a coach, because quite a few people that watch are going to be thinking, how does all this hoarding stuff apply to me? So the question I want to ask first is, or I want to compliment you on, is you are, let's call you an expert as far as people that are hoarding, and you've come to terms with doing what you can do and what you can't do with your mother, but you aren't trying to hide that, worried that it may make people think that you aren't necessarily so great at your job because you weren't able to help your mother. And I think that a lot of business people some of their first clients are people they know personally, friends, family, etc. And if those don't go well, a lot of people think, well, if word gets out I didn't help X, then people won't want to hire me. So I'd appreciate if you talk a little bit about that and your decision process, because I personally think it's a great idea, but I could see a lot of people thinking, maybe she shouldn't share that, you know?
Well, and that I did worry about that. I was concerned about that. Like, if I can't help her, how can I possibly help anyone else? But the truth of the matter is that often the person that we're closest to can be the worst person to try to help us get something done or have a perspective outside of that relationship. And what I mean is, basically, you're so close to someone, it's really hard to be objective. And so part of the reason I don't I do talk about it with her. She does know what I'm talking about. She has been to couple of my presentations. So she is aware of it, but I don't think she realizes how much more I talk about it than just what she has seen. But the reason,
and what does she think about it?
she thinks, I think she's glad that I am talking about it in a way that helps people understand that if you just march into someone's house and say, let's throw it all away, that cuts off communication, that pisses them off. And if you think about it, if you take away the hoarding and you're just looking at two people, who really wants someone to come into your house and tell you what to do immediately, right off the bat? That most of us would find that kind of rude or off-putting at the least. And so there's that. I think she's glad that I'm talking about it in a way that says, hey, these are the terms that we shouldn't use, because it doesn't help. So that part of it is, I think she's glad. Now, me talking about egg crates and being 13 and all that, I'm not sure she's going to be too thrilled if she hears me talking about that. Or some of my blog posts where I say, hey, I'm really glad, the rodents are in the house, but I'm really glad they're not in her camper. Thank God,
Yeah.
But I decided I was going to be real honest about it, because honestly, most of the time, someone in my position trying to help my parent, I'm the worst person in the world to try to do it, because there's a lot of emotional entanglement. But if I hired someone professionally to come in and work with her, there isn't that same level of emotional attachment to each other or the pain that we may cause each other. So that's why I think often we really want to help our family members, but we aren't necessarily the best to do it. And I think for a lot of coaches and a lot of people, I had a friend where I helped organize, but they weren't too thrilled with my cost, but they were thrilled with the result. So when, it's kind of like, there's a give and take here, where you've done what you can up to this point. Now maybe you want someone to come in and help you process that last piece of your space. And so I kind of tie it into encouraging people to look at what's really going on for themselves, taking care of yourself, and then figuring out, are you the best person to help that person, or do you need to back off a little? And
see, that's the thing that impresses me, is that you don't beat yourself up over it. And there are a lot of people who might intellectually think, I'm not the best person to help them, but in their heart, they're still going to blame themselves for that person not having changed or moved forward.
I've been through that part of it. Earlier this year, there was kind of the big blowout that typically happens if you are trying to help in any way. Even if you're not doing anything actively and you're just talking with them, that can really still not be a great thing, because they don't think they have a problem. So why do they need help? And so you're kind of trying to have a rational discussion with someone who doesn't recognize there's a problem. And that was kind of my tipping point, where I was like, you know what? All the people I've talked to, all the people I've been exposed to, and they don't want to say they know this about this experience, yet they're so happy I'm talking about it. I'm like, all right, that's it. All gloves are off. I'm going to talk about my story. True, I haven't been able to help my mom deal with the stuff, but I still have a relationship with her. And I had made a conscious decision that I would try to maintain some level of a relationship with her versus always focusing on the stuff, because that had never worked when I was growing up. It never worked when I was younger and would visit and say, hey, what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially after my dad passed away, I just felt, and I think that's my burden, is that I feel like I have a duty and an obligation to be connected, even if I have to set really good boundaries and limit my time. I still feel like that I need to be connected with her. And so that's part of the reason why I back off on the stuff, but maintain the relationship as best as I can. And for me, that becomes more important than the stuff. But again, that awareness of, like, if something with her health happened, that she wouldn't be able to go home, she doesn't seem to have that key piece of awareness, even though that's exactly what happened with my dad. There's just that lack of awareness is like the biggest problem I see for the person that hoards. They don't realize the detriment that can happen if they aren't allowing anyone to help, and they're saying they don't have a problem. And later your health issues can cause you to have a huge problem.
Yeah. Is that because it grows on them usually over many years of time? And so to them, to somebody who sees it, it's in the face. It's a huge problem. But to the person who's lived there over the years, it's like they don't really realize how the problem was there because it creeped up on them so slowly.
I think that's true in some degrees. We kind of acclimate to the environment that we're in, and we just kind of say, well, physically I can't move these items, or I can't make a decision, so I'm going to just make no decision, which is still a decision. So I think over time it can just keep building up, and by the time someone realizes it's a problem, it's a huge problem. And an aspect of that is clutter blindness, where the person really does not see it or process it in their brain the same way. So they literally can look at this pile of stuff and see nothing wrong with it, versus someone who hasn't been there in 5 years and walks in and says, holy cow. So
yeah. Okay, the other thing I wanted to get back to was something you said in the beginning, and that is that you were talking to a business coach, and you were talking about what things you knew and what skills you had, and you were like, they were like, you need to talk about hoarding. This could be your thing, and you were not seeing that. So what I want to know is could you talk a little bit to people about accepting their past experiences and turning that into a profession, or turning it into your thing or your niche or whatever you want to call it?
I think that it can be really challenging to go through some of this on your own. And I am a very often stubborn, opinionated person who gets in her own way. And when it was first presented to me, I was like, are you seriously? But on the other hand, these were very successful business people, years far ahead of me, in business. And I had to really think about it. And it took me probably a year to really accept that this is probably something I really need to actually focus on. And it's only been about the past year where I really stepped up talking about it and being more open about it and trying to get comfortable with Facebook Live and things like that. So I also spent 3 years in therapy with a counselor and worked through a lot of things. That came about because I had been married for a long time, and eventually that became a very horrifying situation. And it kind of started as marriage counseling and ended up as Tammy staying in counseling, ending a marriage because that was truly the only option at that point for me. And when you see someone else's behavior totally go off the rails and they wanted to accept no responsibility whatsoever for that, you have to take a step back and say, okay, am I going to live like this forever, or is it time for me to end this? And I was not raised in a situation where you just run about, divorcing like confetti. And so it was very difficult. But I can honestly say that I'm really glad that that actually occurred, that I was actually able to step back far enough to say this is not going to work anymore for me. And so I had a lot of help and accountability for a long time to help me work through some of those challenges from childhood and basically recreating a similar dysfunctional situation in a marriage. And so I think that you need to have someone to kind of hold your hand sometimes for you to get to the point where you're able to say, okay, I'm going to take all this stuff, all this garbage, or what I refer to as it takes a lot of BS to grow a beautiful flower. And that's what I kind of decided that was there's like this popular thing going around that says sometimes when you're buried, it actually means you're planted. And I've kind of adopted that as I was planted. And for many years, I felt buried. And so it was kind of a mindset shift that had to happen, but it did not happen, in a solo, thing. It happened with groups and people and meeting others who were on a similar journey, even though they may not know anything about hoarding. They may know a whole lot about chaos and dysfunction and trauma. And so connecting with really servant, soul-centered people, which I know that's like business is like it's money and dollars and cents, and yeah, all that matters, but you have to find your tribe. You have to find people who are somewhere on a similar journey so you can support each other. And that has been the biggest piece for me, is to get off that whole I'm going to do it on my own and I'm going to be this solopreneur. And you might be, but that doesn't mean you can't talk to someone like Max or hire someone to help you with certain things that you need. So really focusing on shifting your mindset and then being really accepting of the idea that you aren't going to do it all on your own. I mean, really, wars are not won by one person typically. Maybe if you're the sniper, but typically
I've read a lot of books from people who do their research before they write fiction. And the one thing I've noticed about snipers is there's always a spotter. Even a sniper ain't out there by himself.
Exactly. So there's that support team. And in the movies that I've seen where, that is portrayed, you are a team. You have that additional person so that you are not actually out there on your own. And sometimes you might, in business, you're going to need more than one of those people. But initially, you need someone to help you kind of sight it in.
Yeah. In the blindness community, we have this conversation all the time about independence versus interdependence. And there are a lot of blind people, especially those in the early days of losing their sight, who they have almost a compulsion. It's almost like the hoarder's compulsion or the drinker's compulsion to do everything on their own. And me, I'm one of those blind people who my idea of doing it by myself is having somebody else help me do it. That's my idea of independence, is finding that person who's meant for whatever. And I have no desire to use my white cane to get from my chair to speaking stage and back. That to me is just, it's a peril not worth experiencing for the purposes of being, of appearing to be independent, because a lot of times that is what it comes down to, is the appearance. So we have that discussion, and I've also had this discussion with other bloggers and podcasters. There are way too many people out there online who do stuff, and they never tell you about the people who helped them do it.
And that's true. I mean, for a long time, I was like, oh, I'm not going to name drop. But I'm like, well, I am now because
when somebody does something that helps you along your journey, it's not name dropping. It's gratitude, girl.
It is. And I'm like, I kind of got off track with it, but I was doing like these thank you posts where I was like, I don't know what else to say, but thank you. And here's why, like with Dr. Robert Garcia, I can't even tell you how much he has helped me keep going, keep in line. Hey, here's this other thing. You should try this thing. I mean, I can't even believe the amount of value I have gotten from knowing him and being part of his group and part of his community. It's phenomenal to me that I got to meet someone like that. And if I had never started a business journey, how would I have ever met some of these people? I mean, some of the people I know now are because I decided to try to figure out business. And I had no idea. I mean, I had cleaned houses before. I had done MLM stuff, but an actual business, I wish I had known Dr. Robert Garcia when I started.
Yeah, we also believe in dropping URLs here when we're doing our gratitude work. So if you know his website, go ahead and mention it to people.
Oh, what the heck is his website?
He has a group on Facebook called Success Engineers, or is that the right name of the group?
Yes, Success Engineers with Dr. Rob.
Yeah, so and both of us will highly recommend you go find him and request to join that group, or reach out to one of us and tell us why you should be, and we'll invite you or send you a request, because it is a very supportive, encouraging, and also butt-kicking group when you need it.
Exactly. And when you are on a business journey, you need that accountability. And it's really scary. I mean, I have posted some things in there that I was like, I don't know where else to go or who to ask, but I think this is the right place for it. And it is. It is the place to ask and to be trained, and some of the things that you need. Plus, you can hire him. The Warrior Strategist is, what he goes by, and I really wish I could think of his website right now. But
well, if you will send me the link when we're through, I'll make sure to add it when I post the episode, so we'll make sure he gets his credit. But I name drop all the time. I even name drop during talks, which is something nobody else does. I'm like the only guy doing that I know of.
I think it might be your next level of success.com, but I'll have to verify that.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I might be giving away somebody else's. I'm just being honest here.
Yeah, I know. We love honesty. We love storytelling, and like I said, we're not above name dropping here because it isn't really name dropping. It is honestly, when I say it's gratitude, that's exactly what it is, because there are a lot of people online, and if you will, make yourself open and let people know that you do need help with whatever issue you need help with. There are lots of people out here who will show up. And when they do, mentioning them on other people's shows or in blog posts or emails or whatever, that's just saying thank you.
Yes. And so I think I need to start having a list of the names. I actually did that. I started writing all the names down of the people that I really should be, mentioning or just sharing the wealth, because I mean, when I look at the exact steps to how I actually met Rob Garcia, it was Larry Broughton, my first business mentor, who I met Thomas Watson, who invited me to Vetpreneur Tribe, and Vetpreneur Tribe is how I met Dr. Garcia. So I mean, there's like this very linear thing that happened over a period of years that it helped me be here right now, being able to say, hey, I met this person. And it's not like I really planned it that way. It just kind of, that's how it evolved. And I'm really grateful that it did.
Yeah.
And if you are,
I got here from Manny Wolf's 1000 Speakers Academy group.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I found out about Rob. So, but yeah, it's yesterday, my friend and editor, Lorraine Regularly of wordingwell.com, who I like to mention whenever I can, because honestly, I may have published my books without her, but it would have taken longer and they wouldn't be as good. So she said yesterday on Facebook, she said, you know, Max, knowing you is like being invited to a party. And you never know who else is going to be there or who else Max is going to introduce you to. But you can know they're going to be somebody you need to meet. And I was like, I never thought about that before, but that is a really cool expression of the fact that I have attracted so many amazing, talented people to my community. And a lot of them started off as guests on my show or people who volunteered to help me solve problems in one of my businesses.
I really like that analogy, because like Chelsea, I met her through you, and we had like this amazing conversation around, style and clothes and all those things. And, I'm not sure I would have come across her had I not known you, and I'm pretty sure that's how we met, was in the Success Engineers group. And there's some freaking kick-ass people in there that just amaze me on a daily basis.
Yeah. So once you decided that that hoarding or helping people address their hoarding was going to be your thing, how long did it take you before you started being able to speak about it, to write about it and talk about it openly, and really start to find your voice as the strategist and one of the experts in the field?
It took me a while to get my stride because I was doing on-site work with a lot of people. And so I was spending a lot of time doing that and driving to and from some job sites and things. So I would say, when I look back at some of my blog posts, I would say about 2015 is about when I decided, okay, I'm going to blog more. I'm going to talk more. I'm going to look to try to do some presentations. And so it's kind of just been, so what are we in? We're 2018. So it's taken me probably about the last 14 months or so. I have really decided I'm going to step it up as far as posting and blog posts and being more vocal and more visible. And so I would say it has taken me a good couple of years from the first time I had an on-site client to now. It's been about 2.5 years where I'm primarily moving forward with speaking, with consulting, which I can do virtually. I mean, people can send me a picture. We can do a video call. I can do longer term coaching. And I do come at it from a coaching perspective, because mental health is its own thing, and you really do need that kind of support if you're struggling with that. But if you need help figuring out where to start, what to do, that's where I come in. And we can make a plan that you can DIY. We can make a plan where you meet with me weekly, or you send me pictures and I can say, hey, this is kind of what I would suggest you start with, and really help people reduce that overwhelm, which, by the way, most people who have clutter of any level, whether you have like one pile of mail or a whole house that needs a dumpster, the biggest thing is they're overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. And I find if you can say that, that's a beginning, because then you can start asking for help.
Yeah, well, we're big about asking for help around here. That's one of my core messages. I want to go back a little earlier, from the time you met with the business coach and started to make this a business that you were growing. How long was it from those meetings with the coaches to when you got your first paying client?
So at the time that I started, I had a full-time job, and I was able to use some of that to afford some business mentoring.
Yeah.
So when did I start that?
I'm just curious because one of the
Because
things that people have trouble with is they look online and they see where other people seem to be going from 0 to 40 or 50 miles an hour in a week or a month. And so I like to ask people, how long did it take you to get your first paying client? I mean, I can remember the first money order I cashed because it wasn't actually a check that they sent me. And it was for $300. I was very happy to get it. But I was just curious, how long from the time you started till the time you got your first paying client?
so I actually started my business in 2013, but I didn't start actually doing that full time till 2015. And I really didn't know what I was doing, honestly.
None
And
of us
that's where
do.
a business strategist at that point would have been really helpful. But once I left, I mean, it was probably about a year before I landed a contract with someone to help them with this Uber situation they had. And it just kind of went from there. But I had been doing blog posts. I had been going to awareness. I went to a conference. So there's something else called Inc. magazine. They have something where they have veteran entrepreneurs come in and have a lot of additional help and things like mentoring for them. And so I went through that process, all while trying to figure out where am I going to get a client. And then it kind of just grew from there. But the thing is that once I did that, I could see where I could have impact, a real positive impact. And the money,
Yeah.
we need it, but the impact was so valuable for me to see the difference in someone's perspective. One of my first clients had a major health crisis, which is how the hoarding kind of came in to be a huge problem.
Yeah.
And so once I was able to see how much impact I could have by just being present and talking through it and giving him a starting point and kind of giving him little mini assignments when I wasn't there, that was huge for me to see what just a few little tweaks like that could do for someone who was ready to do something different. So it was not a quick process by any means. I went through quite a bit of savings. And so it was not, I wouldn't necessarily recommend my method, but but I know a lot of people who you kind of get to the point where you're like, okay, I got to go do this no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now, even though I have some part-time jobs and things like that, my mission, my passion has not changed because it's so necessary and so many people connect with being authentic.
See what she just said, people? She still has part-time jobs, okay? There's nothing wrong with having other income until your business gets to the point where it can sustain you all by itself. One of my favorite books that I've read in the last year is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, who's known for Eat, Pray, Love. And there she says she always had a day job, that even after Eat, Pray, Love became a wildly successful book and movie, she was still a freelance author for magazines all over the world, and was still pitching new assignments to magazines every day because she felt like my passion really shouldn't have the pressure of having to support me all by itself. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because a lot of people think, hey, I'm not a success at what I'm doing until it's paying all the bills.
Well, and I really struggled with, okay, do I do that or do I not? But I can tell you that it has taken some of the pressure off, where if I have someone contact me who needs something, I can come at it more from how can I help? Do I have the time? Instead of, oh my gosh, this is the next, buck. And
Yeah.
so that has taken a lot of the pressure off of being able to keep doing the mission, the passion, without turning people away. And so it is a real juggling act these days.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've done the other thing where you think you're secure and you have the cubicle and it just was killing me in a different way. And here now I get to be a little more creative, and I get to write, and I get to do proposals. I get to talk with
Yeah.
awesome people, where if I
Yeah.
hadn't started this journey, that wouldn't have happened. Or it wouldn't have happened in the same way.
Yeah.
And so while people in my life may not always agree with my decisions, I don't always agree with them sometimes. But, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. So I know we've been at this a while. I got two more questions I want to ask and before we finish, and I hope it's okay with you. One is, have you gotten to the point yet where you've started reaching out to manufacturers of products you use when you're helping your clients get rid of the clutter?
well, it's interesting you bring that up, because someone else that talks a lot about this type of thing is Trish Lito, with affiliate marketing, and talking about your products that you like. And so I've actually been compiling a list this past week of different people or companies, manufacturers of things that I do use personally or in my business. And I'm like, I need to work on that a little more. I need to find out, do they have affiliates? Do they, would they sponsor a podcast? Because I'm going to start, well, I kind of have started one called Real Talk About Hoarding Issues, or Real Talk About Hoarding. And I see there is this level of shame still, and I intend to break through that. And one way to do that is to just be a source. So there is some of that I really want to explore. And the other part of that is a lot of those entities do come across hoarding and they're not sure what to do. If you're like pest control, or if you're HVAC or something, you may not know what to do. And
I see. You may be able to educate them on how to address these situations and create a relationship that leads to a sponsorship. Is that what you're thinking?
that's kind of what I'm thinking. And the education and the value piece, like how can I help you when you come across this? How can I help your service people know what to do? I mean, seriously, if
Yeah,
you
just thinking out loud here. A lot of these companies you're talking about are franchises, so
Mhm.
it may be worth your while to contact whoever does the training or education or whatever they're calling it at the corporate level for their franchisees. It may be
Mhm.
possible that you could slide into that package every franchisee has to pay for when they join one of those companies.
Oh, that's not a bad idea, because I had been thinking about that
Maybe
with.
create a video course that they could
Mhm.
they could send to every new franchisee, and they send you a check, something like that.
I like that, and it's such a rampant problem that I felt like I'm kind of doing a disservice if I just hide away and help people only one on one. I just feel like I'm supposed to have a bigger impact, a bigger reach, and by helping other people know what to say or do, that increases the amount of people that can help these other people, even if it's just don't judge them, just be nice. you know Start
Yeah, it's
there.
amazing. It's amazing how hard it is to get people to do the simple things. It's incredibly difficult. Um, but and one thing people it's happened to you, and it happens to a lot of people that start this, is you start down this road of helping other people or offering a service, and you're at that point of finding satisfaction in what you do, having a purpose, helping others, and then you do that for a while, and you see the growth in yourself, and you start to see you as well as your business in different ways, and then it's really hard not to want more or not to want to expand, maybe not in size, but in the types of things that you do for people as a way of serving them. So, not surprised you think you should be bigger.
I just when I see how much pain is it locked up in people because they don't feel heard or they don't feel acknowledged or they feel like they're alone and struggling. I have felt all of those things. And I want people to know they aren't alone. And for heaven's sakes, you don't have to be ashamed of somebody else's behavior. You know, that was their situation, their choice, their scenario. And if you don't have to repeat it, you know, or if you have, you can find a way to change your future. You maybe can't do much about the past, but you can change going forward. And I think when you start on something really important I've learned is that I am separate from my business. My business is a separate standalone entity. Yes, I may be the face of it. Yes, I would like to pay myself. You know, I would like that to be a sustainable thing. But
Yeah.
people don't want to talk about money. But I'm like, hey, you know, you need money. You need to pay bills.
Yes.
You need to pay other people.
Yes, and I'm a big proponent of not just money, but reliable money. I would rather somebody pay me less money, but get it every week or every month, as opposed to somebody writing me a big check. That's just my opinion. I could be totally backwards on this, but to me, income that is generally reliable is much better than, well, you know, you see it all the time. People that win the lottery and they're in bankruptcy court a year later.
Yes, and that is a huge that's actually a good point about the mindset, because I had to really start turning around money. You know, I went through this little course around your money shift, and it helped me look at what's my attitude about money. You know, money doesn't grow on trees. You know, we're not made of money. It's all really a perspective that is from lack versus abundance. And so I had to go from, you know, I'm worth more than that per hour. What I know with the education, the training, the things, the conferences, all the things I've done to get here have a value, monetarily as well as impact wise.
Yeah.
And accepting that you might have to accept bigger amounts of money because of what you do and who you are and how you came about, you have to say, I'm valuable enough to accept that. And that was very much something I had to come to terms with personally. But one of the really important things
Excuse me.
You all right?
Yeah, I'm okay. One of the really important things
is to recognize that while you may be the face of your business and you may be doing chief everything initially, at some point you are separate from your business, and really helping to delineate that helped me, because what might be good for me might not be good for my business and vice versa. So I had to really step back and separate, recognize that is a standalone separate entity from me, even though I'm highly invested in it.
Yeah. Yeah, the old thing, it sounds like you're talking about the problem that a lot of people in manufacturing have had, where they do the same job for 30 or 40 years and they see themselves as the job, and when the job goes away, they have trouble adjusting.
Right.
And you're saying you're not the business. You're two totally separate people. Right? Okay. The one last question I wanted to ask, and I don't know if anybody's ever thought about it this way or asked it, but I'm going to put it out there. I'm one of these people. I grew up in a family that traveled a lot. In the early days of the carnival business or businesses that traveled, there wasn't a lot of space. So I grew up with the idea that possessions, you needed to pick them very carefully. And also that if you had a favorite toy or collectible, you might not want to take it with you in the house trailer. So I'm one of those people who I'm on the totally opposite end of the scale from a hoarder, in that it's almost as if I have no interest in acquiring or collecting anything. And I sometimes wonder if that's a mirror image or the other side of the coin from hoarder. And I sometimes wonder if there isn't something wrong with me, because I'm one of those people, when it's my birthday or Christmas, I have to be compelled to tell people what it is I want. And I usually have to sit down and think about it and make a list and decide what it is I want, because things just don't do it for me. And I've often wondered if there's something maybe broken in me there, you know?
Well, I don't know that it's broken. I think partially it's something that you learned when you were younger, that there's only so much room, so I only better bring what's important to me and not something that will get lost or broken. So like it's almost like you had like a level of, okay, this thing can go with me because it's really important, but this other thing is really important, but I'd really be upset if I lost it or it got broken. So I'm going to take this one thing that I'm a little less attached to, and if something happens, I won't be as upset. I mean, to me, it's like all subconscious, behind the scenes. Obviously, you're not thinking of it, but it's almost like there's levels of what was important to you. But I mean, they have this movement of like minimalist living and tiny house living, and frankly, I spend 3 days in my camper and I'm done. I mean,
I spent 40 to 50 weeks a year in trailers. In the last trailer we owned, which was the largest one my family ever lived in, and when I say family, I mean 4 or 5 people at a time.
wow.
The largest one we ever lived in had 350 square feet. That was the largest one. Now, at the same time we were at the end of our business, there are people who are in the business who have, bigger shows with more income and more money. And some of them have 2-story travel trailers or motorhomes that they travel in. And, some of them spend over $1 million for their portable houses.
Wow.
We didn't have $1 million invested in everything we owned. I mean, I used to tell people all the time when we would play events where we had to cooperate with other ride owners, I would usually go, I would dig a hole and bury everything I own if in exchange for one ride that he has. It's a kind of so and that's the biggest one we ever had was 350, almost 400 square feet, and most of the time it was less than that. So yeah, it was really a balancing act to think about what's important that you want to take and what's important that you want to leave. But my brother worked for a woman who actually had a huge travel trailer, a 53-foot semi-trailer that she lived in, and it had custom-built cabinets all the way through this thing that were insulated and built so that stuff that was in them wouldn't move or break during transit. And she was one of those people who had 4 or 5 barns worth of accumulated stuff at home when she wasn't home. And I often thought she was a hoarder, but when you're a multimillionaire, you can kind of be a hoarder, can't you?
Well, you can be, and that is kind of one of those things where the more money you have, the more houses you can have with stuff in them, the more barns or buildings. And so, I mean, there's kind of this concept that behavior is only for someone who doesn't have a lot of money, but that isn't really true. It's across all socioeconomic situations. It's just you can hide it better if you
have more money.
And so, I mean, there is that truth to that, where some people might have money where they could choose to deal with it, but they don't want to deal with the pain or the issues or whatever. And so their stuff just stays there and builds and accumulates. And there are some, like I think it's in the 30s, there was the Collier brothers in New York where they lived in a mansion stacked full of stuff. But eventually, I think one of the brothers died in there. And so they had all this stuff and they lived in, upscale, but they weren't exactly healthy, with all the stuff. So,
yeah. Well, I tell you, I've really enjoyed talking with you. People, I've been hanging out here with Tammy Moses from homesareforliving.com, and she's a hoarding strategist. She's also chief encouragement officer. And I'd like you to end by doing 2 things, or one, telling people one thing that you would like to say to those who may be hoarders, and one thing you'd like to say to people who are trying to help hoarders, and then give out your website and your other social media accounts.
Okay, thank you. If you are a person that hoards, know that you are valuable and that there is a way for you to change what you're doing if you're ready to do that. And if you are a person trying to help a family member or a loved one or any person, know that you don't have to do that alone, and that your best approach is to start talking to them as they're a human being, and leave the judgment out of the equation. If you are a kid that is trying to figure out how to survive that now, try the best you can to have your own little space that you can keep for you. And I am reachable on Facebook. I'm Tammy Moses on Facebook. My company is Homes Are for Living. I am also website homesareforliving.com, and I am on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with anyone who has questions or concerns, or just wants more information. I have some tip sheets and things like that as well that I can provide to people.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me today.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate being able to talk with you.
All right. Okay, it's really enjoyed doing this, and who knows, someday somebody's going to ask me, Max, if the show is over, why is the guest still hanging out in the background? But my former co-host, Frederick By, he used to have us do this thing where we would talk about what we learned and make it as a bit of a recap of the show. And I think the couple of things that I've learned here from Tammy today is that it really is we all have some sort of a thing that we have picked up during our lives. And at the time, it may have been stressful, embarrassing, painful, but sharing that and taking that and turning it into some sort of a business is one of the best ways that you can serve others and at the same time continue to help yourself grow and possibly heal from some of the things that you've experienced in the past. I noticed that it wasn't right away that she went from accepting that she could talk about hoarding to talking about hoarding to getting paid to help people with hoarding. And I really appreciate that she shared that honesty is important, even if some people might think some of the things you're sharing are indications that you don't know what you're talking about or that you aren't as successful as you'd like to be, that it's all about being honest with ourselves, with our audience, with our potential clients. And the more we share and let them know that we're real people, that they can connect with us, they can trust us, that we're not going to tell them things that aren't true just to make ourselves look better, or say things about other people that aren't true to make them or look worse, then we start to create that like, no trust thing that leads to people hiring us when and if they're ready to. So those are some great things I learned from Tammy today, and also about her confirming that we can be friends and connect with people online, that we can build our own communities of fellow travelers and other people that are trying to solve problems similar to ours, if not exactly the same. And that when we fail to connect with these people and allow them to help and also help them in return, we're making it so much harder on ourselves. So I hope that y'all will connect with Tammy. And even, you know, I don't know how many of you might know somebody where you could use her service. She's a really, I think she's a really great woman. I think we could all learn a lot from continuing to follow her growth and progression as a business owner and as an expert. And who knows, maybe someday as a keynote speaker or the director of a nonprofit or something. We'll just have to wait and see where it takes her. And again, I am the blind blogger, Maxwell Ivy. You can find me at theblindblogger.net, where you can also purchase any of my books, including my first book, Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light, A Blind Man's Inspirational Guide to Success. which includes 11 actionable exercises that will help you get unstuck and make progress towards achieving those big goals and dreams in your own life. So I appreciate you taking the time with me. Until next time, thank you. God bless you and take care out there. Too many times we stand aside and let the waters slip away. To what we've put off to tomorrow has finally come today. So don't stand upon the shoreline and say you're satisfied. Choose to chance the rapids and dare to dance the tide.